About that beer I owed ya. Today, Half-Life is 21 years old. Half-Life is an important franchise to me. Even though I played my first Half-Life game 9 years after Episode 2 came out, it's a series that means a lot to me. Even though there hasn't been a game in a decade, and even though the series isn't ever likely to conclude, it still has a strong community that discusses and creates content for it like it's only just come out. We're captivated by this game, the state of its next game unknown, and our questions left unanswered. I've heard people say that there's nothing to discuss about Half-Life anymore, and I can't disagree further. Maybe I just haven't been around long enough and I'm just reading new versions of old threads, but it seems like decades after the first game, there are still new things to discover, realizations to be made, and conclusions to come to. When compared to something like Portal, a game much more popular than Half-Life, the discussions of our theoretical physicist exceeds in depth and longevity. Portal is an excellent game, but its discussion and community pales in comparison to Half-Life. There are still theories, but they're fewer and far between. And seeing how Portal 2 was released after Episode 2, I think this is a testament to how complex Half-Life's world is and how much there is to unearth. Now, theories on the internet can come in various shapes and sizes. A lot of them are made mostly for fun, which is totally okay. But they make one crucial mistake in keeping them from being more valid theories. Video games are not real and should not be treated as such. Oftentimes, a game will change the story to fit the gameplay. Things will be scrapped due to budget or time, or even just because. Things will be retconned, and there will be mistakes. This does not mean that theorizing is impossible, however. It just means that you have to acknowledge that there is no perfect story or flawless world. There's no such thing as true canon because none of it is real. You can only try to discover the story they might have been trying to tell, and even then, the story might branch off into multiple ideas. You can only search for what might have been. Before I go any further, I would just like to say that this video is for people who have played the entire, at least most, of the Half-Life franchise. This video will have spoilers for almost every Half-Life game and will not make sense to you if you have not played them. So please, for the sake of you and for the sake of the series, play the games or exit this video. I couldn't forgive myself if I ruined this series for anyone. If you're still here, that hopefully means you played all the Half-Life games. Good job. But first, I'm going to recap the important things in the series for this theory, in chronological order. Again, this is a recap and not a summary. If you haven't played these games, final warning to stop watching. Before the events of Half-Life 1, we know that Black Mesa had been to Xen multiple times, even bringing back live specimens to study. We know that Dr. Braden is the administrator, and that a specific Xen crystal was given to scientist Eli Vance by the mysterious man with a briefcase. During the events of Half-Life 1, we see said man around the facility and even talking to the Black Mesa staff. Gordon then uses the Xen crystal to start the resonance cascade, tearing a hole between our world and Xen. Also to note, Xen is the border dimension, meaning that it's a sort of shared no man's land between all other dimensions. Nothing is native to Xen, they just sort of find a way there, like Gordon did. This includes the Xenian creatures, the Nihilinth and the Vortigons, which have been enslaved by the Nihilinth. Presumably, when Gordon pushes the Xenian crystal through the anti-mass spectrometer, it causes a rip between dimensions big enough that the Nihilinth could keep it open, sending Vortigons and Xen wildlife through. But what reason would the Nihilinth have for doing this? According to an apparent conversation between Mark Laidlaw and Doug Lombardi, it was because he was being hunted by the Combine. The reason the Vortigons, Nihilinth, and Grunts are in Xen, and not their own homeworld, is because they had to flee from them. And the Nihilinth you kill at the end of Half-Life was the last remaining one. It's likely they are pushing into our universe to either flee further or find a better world than Xen. Once you defeat said Nihilinth, you wake back up to the man in the suit. He offers you a job, putting you in stasis if you accept. This is the character the Valve community has called the G-Man, and while that is his name in the code, he doesn't actually have a name in lore. We can, however, make some assumptions based off his name. G-Man likely stood for Government Man at one point. It's likely that during the development of Half-Life 1, he was supposed to be seen as a government higher-up that was pulling all the strings from behind. He also says, "our control," when showing a bunch of tanks and troops on Xen, which suggests that he was working on behalf of the US government. However, this is not the only answer to who this mysterious character is. In later installments, this government aspect is abandoned and likely retconned for more of an interdimensional businessman character. Also to note is that he took 2 more people into stasis in the events of the first Half-Life saga. Alyx Vance and Adrian Shepard. In opposing force, we met Race X, a purely biological military from its own dimension, rather than Xen. It could apparently sense the commotion happening in the border world and decided it could use this opportunity to expand into our world. This is very similar to what the Combine does later. The creative inspiration for the Combine can probably be traced back to Race X concepts. Shepard puts a stop to that, however, but not before the man in the suit can set off an atomic bomb, tying up the loose ends of Black Mesa. In Raising the Bar, which arguably isn't canon, but as I mentioned, nothing really is, we get a bit of a peek of what happened between the Resonance Cascade and the Combine invasion. The Xenian creatures that invaded were causing havoc around Earth, and people began to concentrate in cities as they were the more defendable areas. However, one day, giant pieces of land disappeared from the ground and the citadels appeared, starting the 7-hour war. We know that this ends in Dr. Breen surrendering Earth and the Resistance forming sometime later. The Resistance forming out of humans and Vortigaunts. Vortigaunts with interdimensional knowledge. Then, after a small chat with the G-Man, you wake up on a train to City 17. You quickly join the humans and Vortigaunts in the Resistance, and the events of Half-Life 2 occur. Brain mentions a few interesting things towards the end, however. After that, you fight him as the final boss. And the second you blow up the Citadel, the G-Man shows up to put you in stasis once again. Except not for long. Episode 1 starts off with the Vortigaunts pulling you out of stasis, stealing you from the G-Man. The G-Man is aware of this, however, but he can't seem to do anything about it. You then continue fighting for the Resistance, and don't see the G-Man at all for the rest of the game. In Episode 2, while the Vortigaunts are busy healing Alyx, the G-Man uses this distraction to talk to Gordon. They had been blocking him off until that moment. He mentions employers and tells Alyx to subconsciously deliver a message to Eli Vance. Prepare for unforeseen consequences. I think we know what those consequences turned out to be. So who is the G-Man? What purpose and motive does he have for being so influential on the world of Half-Life? Let's look at some repeating patterns. Putting people into stasis. Out of the 3 playable protagonists in the Half-Life 1 saga, only Gordon and Adrian are taken by the G-Man. Barney Calhoun was left to escape on his own. Why would Barney be left out while Gordon and Adrian were put into stasis? We know that the G-Man had been influencing both of their lives, putting Gordon on the firearms training list and lurking around Adrian's boot camp. In Blue Shift, the G-Man is seen only once and isn't even looking at you. It's safe to say that Barney isn't a concern to the G-Man. The main difference between Barney and the rest is that Barney didn't achieve anything dimensionally significant. Sure, he went to Xen, but only to turn on the Xen relay. Gordon defeated the Nihilanth, and Shepard ended the Race X invasion. Both of these were significant interdimensional powers. Interdimensional powers that the Combine would want to be dealt with. The G-Man commonly uses business-like phrases such as employers or services. His general appearance is that of a businessman, though an interdimensional one. It seems that he is one, but what is he selling? Who is he selling to? And who is he selling for? Let's look at who benefits from the Black Mesa incident. Certainly not the humans. A lot of us are dead, and we lost control of our world. It wasn't the Xenian creatures. They were fine on Xen and were murdered here on Earth. It wasn't the Nihilanth. He was put into extinction. It wasn't Race X. Their invasion was put to an end. It was, however, the Combine. The Combine had been hunting down the last Nihilanth. The Combine is always looking for new worlds to take over and enslave. The Combine would want to ensure no conflict between them and the powerful Race X. The Black Mesa incident, for the Combine, was a perfect storm. And it might have been engineered that way. Let's look at Half-Life 2. Who benefits from the events that happen after you hop off the train in City 17? For once, it isn't the Combine. They lost their control. They lost the Citadel. They lost Dr. Breen. The people that benefit from Half-Life 2 are the Resistance, the alliance of humans and Vortigaunts. Every time you get put into stasis, it happens right after a significant event. The death of a Nihilanth, the death of the Gene Worm, or the death of Dr. Breen. All these things were wanted by some faction. My theory is that the G-Man sells the services of our protagonists to interdimensional factions in the form of a contract. Each event that happens right before the G-Man puts you into stasis again represents another checkmark on that contract. Once the contract is completed, the required services are done, and so the G-Man withdraws you. In Half-Life 1, the Combine paid for a contract to take over another world, kill the final Nihilanth, and prevent Race X from interfering. In Half-Life 2, the buyers of the contract are likely the Resistance. The conditions of it would have been the return of Gordon Freeman, the disruption of the Combine rule, and either the death of Breen or the explosion of the Citadel. It makes sense that the Resistance would be able to do this, as they have interdimensional knowledge from the Vortigaunts. However, how they purchase the contract, or what they would pay, I'm not sure. Towards the end of Half-Life 2, Dr. Breen even mentions the contract.
And this one has proven to be a fine pawn for those who control him.
No!
Don't listen to him, Gordon.
How about it, Dr. Freeman? Did you realize your contract was open to the highest bidder?
Gordon would never make any kind of deal with you.
I understand if you don't wish to discuss this in front of your friends. I'll send them on their way, and then we can talk openly.
This seems to suggest that the Combine is trying to outbid the Resistance. This could also just be Breen trying to bribe you personally, however, so take this, and the rest of this theory really, with a grain of salt. What is for sure, though, is that the Vortigaunts don't want you in stasis. Their contract might be done, but they still need you and definitely don't want you working against them. This is why they physically steal you from the G-Man in the beginning of Episode 1. Their contract had been fulfilled, so they steal you back against the terms. This seems to work for a while, but eventually the G-Man's influence begins to seep in. You still do exactly what he wants, bringing Alyx to White Forest. This isn't necessarily the end of Half-Life, however. Though even farther removed from a solid canon, Mark Laidlaw's Epistle 3 is the closest thing we have to a conclusion. Our sinister figure shows up once again at the end of the text, but not for Gordon this time. This time, Gordon's left behind. It's another person of interest that the G-Man had been influencing for decades. The person the G-Man puts into stasis this time is Alyx Vance. Half-Life VR is a touchy subject. There's evidence for it, precedent against it, and a huge bag of uncertainty and strong emotions. I don't want to hype anyone up, so just realize this is Valve we're dealing with. And for better or for worse, Valve can be unpredictable. However, there is a decent chance that a new Half-Life game could be announced today, which is insane. Tyler McVicker has been reporting on various leaks about this VR addition to the Half-Life franchise, and these rumors are what I'm about to base my further speculation on. In HLVR, apparently, you play as Alyx Vance. It takes place right before Half-Life 2. You go to Zen. The last line in the game is supposed to be, these short sentences give us a lot to think about. Alyx has a strong connection to the G-Man. As we know, she was saved by him in Black Mesa for unknown purposes. We also know that he is able to make her carry messages, and that they both leave Gordon on the Borealis in Epistle 3. In HLVR, Alyx Vance visits Zen, but why? What reason would the Resistance have for getting into interdimensional affairs? The first Half-Life game since 2009 would have to cease you doing something significant. You can't just end with a gunship battle or blowing up Combine Outpost number 137. You'd have to do something important. And what would be more important to the Resistance than bringing back Gordon Freeman? This has been VMF Walks, and in the meantime, this is where I get off.